Hello, welcome to InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. Homeless veterans are sleeping on the streets of America every night for lack of shelter. In its annual report to Congress, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development said in 2023, 35,574 veterans were experiencing homelessness. That's 22 of every 10,000 veterans in the United States. It's a 7% increase over the year before, and worse, the number of unsheltered veterans went up 14%. Well, one local veteran decided to do something about it, and has. Robert Wood, a Navy veteran, founded a nonprofit, Help Oregon Veterans. It does one thing, provides overnight shelter for veterans who might otherwise have to sleep on the street. Is that all there is to it? Just put a roof over a veteran's head for the night? Yes. Would you please welcome my guests, Robert and Judith Wood, the founders of Help Oregon Veterans. Nice to have you with me in studio today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I observed on your website was really interesting to me. You said, our aim is to be the first step on the road back to the life of dignity that our brothers and sisters in arms deserve. Can you explain that?
Oh, absolutely. We take a very down-to-earth approach. Excuse me. There are other organizations out there. Have you ever wondered why the state, the city, and other organizations can put so much time, effort, and money into this very cause, and yet it never seems to get any better? Well, as a group, our board of directors got together and said, well, why is that? Why is it that we're putting so much attention on this, and yet we still see homeless veterans on the street? And we came to the conclusion that maybe there's another way to serve them. I'll give you an example. It's not a good example, but it'll help make the point clear. Let's say that you're hungry, and I come by and say, well, here's the keys to a new car. You're thinking, great. Guess what? I still want a sandwich. And I think in some regards what we're doing to homeless people is similar, in that they'll say, look, I'm sleeping in the gutter, I'd like to have a place to stay, and we'll say, here's a condo. You know, for example, in San Francisco, they just spent, I think it's almost $500 million building a giant condo project just for people that are homeless. Do you know that it's a complete disaster? Because if you're in a homeless situation, according to the National Institute of Health, there's 3 reasons that you'll be homeless. One of them is alcoholism, one of them is drug addiction, and one of them is mental health issues. So if you're an alcoholic or you're drug addicted or you have a mental health issue and you're living on the street, does it help you at all to give you keys to a condo? It's like it may be way down the line. That might be something that would be helpful once I've been able to get a grip on myself and my environment. So, you know, those are not solutions that provide an immediate remediation for the issues. And that's what we want to do. Our goal is to say, in essence, and you'll forgive me if I use you, it's like, Wendy, you're living on the streets. We want to give you a place to sleep tonight. That's all, no obligation, come on in. Here's a place to sleep. Yeah, you know, and it may well be kind of a warehouse environment. Here's your spot, here's your lockers, here's what you can do. Get yourself cleaned up. And if you come back tomorrow and you're still an alcoholic, here's a spot, here's no judgment. Until you've had enough time off the street to begin to assess your own progress. Hopefully what it does is it says to that individual, we can help you stabilize. We'll give you access to all of these nice services, but they may not be of any benefit if you're not mentally ready for that. And if you are drug addicted, whether you are willing to acknowledge that or not isn't the issue. The issue is, let's get you off the street. If you come back drug addicted again tomorrow, let's get you off the street. If in 6 months or a year you're still drug addicted and you come back, let's get you off the street. just so that we can help stabilize you to the point where you can then begin to do self-assessment and improvement. Then we can begin introducing you to all of these services. It's that initial step that I think is in many cases lacking. Taking someone who's a drug addict or an alcoholic and saying, $500,000 condo, here you go. I'm not sure it's the best first step.
You say the city of Salem currently has over 1,500 homeless and spends nearly $70,000 per week to provide shelter for only 123 people. Are
right,
you sure
and that's
of
right
that?
off their website.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, why are you confident that you could do better?
Because I don't think that they are addressing the issue that these homeless people face. The city of Salem is doing a great job, and I applaud their effort. I just think it's misdirected. They've skipped that initial step of getting the individual stabilized and getting them ready to mainstream back into society. They're just saying, no problem, where you are, we're going to mainstream you. It rarely works, which is why you don't have a good success rate. And often you find that it just makes matters worse for the homeless individual.
You're a Navy veteran.
Oh, yeah.
What made you take on the plight of homeless veterans?
I'm glad you asked. When I got back out of the Navy, the one thing, and bear in mind, I like the Navy. I had a grand time. To me, being on board ship and going overseas and being able to support my family back over here, it was a nice life. But the minute I got back, I noticed one thing, and it was just profound. I was lonely, even though I was married. So I'd come back, and it's like the relationship between my wife and I is different than the relationship between my guys and I. And I missed that. Firefighters that often stay in their stations with their team frequently feel the same thing. When they retire, it's like, this is nice to be retired, but you can't replace that relationship that you had with all the guys.
Especially if you've seen combat together. Did you see action?
No, I didn't. But what I did see was I was on board a ship. So I did see the evacuation of Saigon.
What?
In 1975.
You were there. What were you doing?
Well, I was on the USS Denver, which is, a moderately sized ship. And we were the air traffic control hub, because I was an air traffic controller, for all of the aircraft that were evacuating the refugees. So as they would lift off from the embassy in Saigon, I'd talk to them, bring them over, and hand them over to a shipboard air traffic controller, and they would land them and get rid of them. You might have seen, there's two very famous pictures. One of them is that one where there's a long ladder that goes up to the top of the embassy building. There's a helicopter on top, and there's a lot of people trying to scramble up. I was talking to those helicopter pilots at that moment about what they needed to get these people out of there. The other one was, we didn't have room on our ship for all these helicopters. None of the ships had, room. So we were pushing these things off into the harbor there near Saigon. There's probably 150 helicopters in the bottom of that bay. And you'll see, pictures of that as well.
You were a young man.
Oh, yeah.
That stays with somebody. I mean, you kind of, when you're younger, you're thrust into action like that right from the get-go, from wherever you were living as a young man?
Sure. Well, it's funny you'd bring that up. I mean, yes, I was 19 and 20 in that event, and I had come from the Mojave Desert. I grew up near the city of Mojave. So I didn't know anything. I mean, I'd never even seen the ocean. So here, it's a long story as to how I wound up in the Navy, but I'm glad I did. And it was really a fun exposure to the rest of the world. Parts of it were, for some people, very, very stressful, like this entire evacuation of Saigon. Some guys just really stressed. That isn't my personality. We went there, I saw that we could do some good, and we did it. And when we were coming back, I thought, well, that was pretty cool. Managed to help some people there. And while we were on board ship, we were taking all of these Vietnamese refugees down to the Philippines, we had a death on board. So we had a burial at sea. We had a tent city set up on board, so that these people had a place to stay until we could get them down to the Philippines. And the whole thing just seemed like, oh, this is really cool. This is something. You're not going to see this every day. But that was the fun part of my exposure to the military. I truly liked it. When I got back, I felt very, very lonely, as I mentioned. And with that, I began reaching out to a bunch of nonprofit organizations, because I kind of thought, this was when I was living in Los Angeles, I thought, there's probably other guys like me that would like to maybe talk about this. And I didn't find them to be particularly helpful. So I went about my career, became an executive at a hospital and that kind of stuff. But eventually we moved up here to Salem, strictly because Judith said, well, that's where I want to go. And here we are. But we got up here and we were driving. It wasn't long after we got here. We were driving through downtown. I saw these guys that were in the gutter, sleeping on the sidewalks. And I looked at them, honestly, I thought, man, they could be me. I could be them. Because a lot of them were my age. These are guys that have kind of coming toward the end of their careers, and they just couldn't get it kicked off. So they wound up on these alternative things, drugs, alcohol. And that's what started. We began talking about what's going on. And that's why I talked to, as a result of that, the state has I forget the exact title of the department, but it is like community housing. Caleb Yant is the guy that is the CFO. I gave Caleb a call. Turned out he was a neighbor. And we talked about how much money they're spending. In part, that's how I came up with some of the numbers on what the state and the city were spending on this. And he's going, Robert, we are dumping bucket loads of money trying to get this figured out, trying to help. It's like, Caleb, I think you are, and I think you aren't. You're definitely dumping money on it. I don't think you're helping. And we had a lot of discussions about that. He's a great guy. If you ever get a chance, I recommend a nice conversation with Caleb. But I talked to others about it, that's how I became familiar with Kevin Mannix, state representative. It's like, Kevin, what's going on here? Is the state doing a lot? And he's going, oh yeah, we got this and that and the other, and we're putting money into it like crazy, and we do not have a handle on how to make this work. They're very honest. They're open with the fact that they're trying to help, and they just can't figure out how to turn the dials to the right area.
What, in your experience, tells you are the ways to go that really fix this problem? You alluded to it with the non-judgmental, if you will, approach, the approach with dignity. What is really going on with these people that makes them so difficult to understand?
I think the problem is that we try to put ourselves in their position, and we can't always. Frequently, if you talk to someone who's living on the street, and I have, it's like, well, they're very intelligent. They're not, some kind of crazed individual. They're broken, and they don't have a way out, and they can't get out. Even if you said, I'll give you a job, it's like, yeah, thanks, I appreciate that, but it's not going to do any good.
These are vets you're talking about.
Sure. Because they're just not emotionally ready, intellectually ready to move on. We actually offered, through a partnership with Walmart, a series of jobs, because they're looking for employees all the time, a series of jobs to people that were homeless. And what was that guy's name, Dennis? No, Randy. Yeah, and Randy says, hey, you bring them down, I will pay to get them new clothes, I will pay to give them a place to get started, I will, he's willing to invest in these individuals. 0 people took him up on it. They're not ready for it. That's too big a jump.
So what's your solution for, right from the get-go. When you and I talked, you said something about give them overnight shelter. That's what we're really all about. Get them off the street.
That's the limit of it.
And so I'm imagining, in what kind of a setting would that be?
Yeah, it's you know, when you explain it to a lot of people, they're going, oh, well, that doesn't provide the level of dignity they deserve. They need to have a house. They need to have a condo. And it's like, if you come from an environment where you're living on the street, the intention is to put them, to take that and almost replicate it, but put it indoors. It's like, this is your spot. Nobody's going to touch your stuff in here. This is safe, it's secure, it's warm. The only difference between this and where you're existing now is the fact that we'll help take care of it. We'll keep everything, you know, we'll have washing machines, we got a shower you want to get cleaned up, whatever. But we don't care what you do, honestly, because that's not our job. Our job is not to fix you. Our job is simply to say, hey, basic fundamental humanity says get you out of the gutter. We're going to take care of that. And once you've been able to stabilize a little bit,
Judith,
then we'll deal with the next step.
Thank you. Judith, how do you explain this when some of those people on the streets could also be female veterans? And putting everybody in the same kind of a place, there are safety concerns. How do you approach people about that?
You would need to kind of have a separate area for them, but that you can't just put them together unless they were a couple, and there are couples out there. And they would need to find it that it's safe. So, you know, not having gone through this yet, there's all of those little details that you need to look at.
Do you think that a kind of a communal environment like that, which it is, I mean, it would be the same building, but they'd have their space in it, actually provides more of a sense of comfort than, let's say, those little tiny homes that I see?
I think it would.
That's a great point.
Because they're together, but yet they have their own space. And I think a lot of those people, if you go past and see them, they're talking to each other. I don't know what the communication is, but you always see people communicating with each other. So I think it's a sense of being close.
That's
together.
Really interesting. Being close, again, there's a sense of camaraderie, perhaps a sense of feeling this is not an unknown situation.
Right.
But how do you deal with the sense of impending, all right, now they're going to ask something of me, you know, where's the bottom line in all of this?
You want to take it, or?
Sure. You know, these are great questions, because what you're asking is how do you give them some independence and yet allow them to build camaraderie. And I think one of the reasons that they do fine on the street, they do okay. It's a hard, miserable life, and yet they're okay. Why is that? Because they have their own little team. You have to allow them to build the teams and move that if you're going to put them into another environment. I mean, many times we've driven downtown and just taken a few minutes to take a look at the various interactions that are happening. And honestly, nobody, I think, wants to be all by themselves. You know, those baskets that a lot of folks push around, full of junk. I mean, there's old milk bottles and rags and one shoe, and but the thing is, it's their stuff. Take that from them, and it's sort of like someone robbing from you. It's like, no, that's my stuff. Leave it alone. It's like it's junk. I don't care what it is, it's my stuff. And it's the same thing. If you don't have that level of trust and camaraderie with the people that you're with, and if you're taken and thrown into like a tiny where you're all by yourself, those little tiny houses, most people kind of go, this is creeping me out. I have to get out of here. It's like, well, yeah, but you can keep your stuff here. It's like, I don't care. I don't like being here all by myself. I feel completely isolated. So allowing those communities to build and stay together, I think, is a fundamental part of allowing them to begin to heal.
How do you get services to them based on your own interactions with them or people that you have volunteering for you? It must be not the easiest job.
You know what? It's self-fulfilling, I think, because if you give them a place where they can be safe, and then simply say, "You guys getting hungry?" And if they say yes, it's like, I've got a nonprofit over here that can help you with the food thing. I've got one over here that can bring us some clothing. Does anybody need clothing? And that's the kind of thing that they can get an immediate relief from an immediate problem while staying in their own little community. And hopefully, if they come back a few times and they begin to clean up and feel better about themselves generally, hopefully, they'll say, maybe I would like to talk to somebody about getting off of drugs.
That's interesting. What are the next steps? What are you up to fulfill this? For example, somebody might say, I know there's this warehouse over in X part of town. It's empty. No one's doing anything with it. You might be able to refurbish that. Are you interested in that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Or do you have anything like that happening now?
We don't. We do have a building fund, as I mentioned to you, and that's where all of the proceeds from our event goes. But we're working with people like Kevin Mannix and Caleb Yant to say, now what? Now that we have the money to do something and we know what we want to do, help us push this forward. And then, hopefully, they can help us kick it into high gear. But a big part of it for us, for the entire board, was simply the fact that we wanted to make sure we were a legitimate organization with a real cause that had a little bit of longevity behind it. I don't want to walk in to, Representative Mannix's office and say, got a great idea, I'd like to have a couple $100,000. Because it's not going to go anywhere. But if, we were just written up the other day in the Keizer Times. Beautiful article. People call and email us to say, hey, I just read about this. How can I help? And that's what we're doing. We're building this foundation, this grassroots group that will, I think, soon, because we're getting a lot of momentum, but within probably a year, we'll be able to go out and say, now we're ready. Let's find a place to start bringing these people in.
This is interesting because many people think of nonprofits as just a brick wall, this is it, and you can look it up in anywhere and find out about it and what it does. But people don't realize every nonprofit started small, started with an idea, got it, built a foundation under it, and was able to take it forward from there, and there you are.
That's where we are. Honestly, if it weren't for Judith, this would have never got off the ground. Because all the things, there's paperwork to be filed. There are things that we have to do with the state, with the IRS, with the Department of Justice. All those kind of groups get involved in an organization of this kind. And it becomes a bit of a morass. If you have somebody that's willing to stay on top of that, a real detail-oriented person, it's a huge plus.
Bingo.
Bingo.
And are you encouraged by the process now that it's under your fingertips?
Oh, yes. Once you go through it, you learn over the years of what you need to do and what you need to look for. So, yes.
How is the community coming together? I'm thinking that other people might be getting more interested in what you're doing now that they see some of the outlines on it.
Well, I think the more that people understand what we're trying to provide, which is that step number one on the road back. It's difficult to tell somebody, pardon me, we want to help, here's the ladder, if you can just get to step number 5, we'll pick it up from there. I'd like to be step number 1. That's what our organization is. Come over here, we'll help you get on step 1 now. Take a breath. Let's see about that second step. And that's the whole objective of our group. It is to give that incremental, the tiniest little bit of hope to people that really, I think, frankly, don't often have it.
In its ultimate context of fulfilling its mission, all of these people who take that first step with you, all those veterans, do go on to find ways to step by step.
I hope so, you bet. And we'll be there to help them. If they need food, they need clothing, at some point we'll be able to introduce transportation options, all of those things. But let's get you out of the gutter.
Do you have any stories you'd like to tell me about anybody that you've helped or given you some insight? It's one of those homeless people.
We actually have a good friend whose name is Jared Noland. He just moved away to Kentucky, breaks my heart. But he introduced us, and he was on our board until he had to move. And another musician, isn't that? I'm just picking up on a trend here. But he introduced us to a guy who came back from Vietnam and who was completely broken. And I don't want to reveal his name, but we'll call him Daniel. And Daniel came back, and he had really struggled with the entire issue of being overseas. His wife got fed up with the whole deal, and she left and took the child, and he came back and found nothing. So he felt completely alone. And I can't overemphasize how desperate that feeling of solitude is when you first get back. It's just, oh my gosh, it's suffocating. Not for everybody. Some people come back, it's like, welcome home, son, let's get going on. But for a lot of people, myself included, it was just like, oh boy, this is just a tough thing to come back to. Well, Daniel came back. Not only did he come back and feel completely isolated, but he'd been completely abandoned. His wife left, took the kid, parents were nowhere around. So he wound up doing all the bad things. And within a very short period, he was a drug addict who drank too much and lived on the streets, right here in town. And was the whole process of getting him back to where he is now, which truthfully is a beautiful place for him, because he's got a job, he's got people that love him, he's got a girlfriend, the whole thing. But the process took a long time. It wasn't just, here, Daniel, here's a house, here's a car. It was one step at a time until Daniel got to the point where he could stand on his own. So, those kind of stories can happen.
Tell us again how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We chose the name Help Oregon Veterans because we want to be able to help Oregon veterans. So if you want to help Oregon veterans and you'd like to get a hold of us, you go to helporegonveterans.org. It's on the internet. Type it in, we're there.
I've seen your website. It has all your messages there.
It does.
And ways to get in touch.
I think it's a beautiful website because it's very patriotic, and it shows people in real need. So it's a nice site to go to.
I appreciate this conversation. I learned a lot because of your perspectives and what you've been in the trenches, if you don't mind my using that expression, helping people and learning what really works.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today on InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw.